Alright, you've seen the thumbnail, you've seen the title, you know what you're in for, so buckle up because there's not going to be any intro today, so let's begin. Alright, so what I'm thinking of having happen for this specific story is that, just like in the original timeline, once Izuku would turn about 4 years old, give or take, he's obviously going to be going to the Quirk doctor, and once there, this is when Izuku's going to find out that he still hasn't developed his quirk. The doctors would run a multitude of tests on him, but Izuku's one of those special cases that has a quirk that you can't exactly detect. It doesn't make him stronger, doesn't make him faster, doesn't make him see any better, doesn't really do anything for him. And they tried getting him to breathe fire or use some sort of telekinetic ability like his mother, but it just didn't work because Izuku's quirk was actually a quirk by the name of Slice. And his quirk is essentially going to allow him to cut anything. And I really do mean that. It does not matter who you are, he will cut you. How dense the object is, he will cut it. This dude is basically going to be having Mihawks' incredible swordsmanship prowess, minus the swordsmanship prowess, and he's just going to be able to just straight up like swing things around and just cut them down the way that Mihawk does. At least when he was introduced in the Baradier arc, right? Where the dude pulls up and just absolutely decimates everything. That's the kind of showings that we're going to be getting from this timeline's Izuku. So with that said, let's jump into Izuku going back to school and what his daily life is going to be like. So in this timeline, because obviously he's not necessarily going to be told that he's quirkless, more or less the doctor's probably going to give him something along the lines of, hey kid, keep your head up, you probably aren't quirkless, you still have a chance to develop a quirk. So Izuku goes back to school telling everybody that he's what the doctor called a late bloomer. And of course, all the kids hearing this, some of them would just look at him and be like, well, at least you'll get a quirk. Until suddenly, one kid comes up. And I'm sure many of you guys can guess who this is. Bakugo would go over towards Izuku saying, worthless Izuku, late to the party as always. You won't even be developing a quirk yet? That's lame. I bet whenever you do get one, your quirk will be as lame as your mom's. Izuku hearing that would say, hey, that's not nice, Kachan. And Bakugo hearing this would tell him to shut up, as the rest of the kids would like look at Bakugo, know that they'll probably get picked on unless they join his side, and start literally making fun of Deku. So he would just kind of sit there and just take it, staying silent the whole day. And the moment this guy gets picked up from school from his mom, he just breaks down crying. Inko starts to ask what's wrong, and Izuku would say, Bakugo's mean, as you know, she pretty much gets to the bottom of everything. And in this timeline, Inko, being a good mother for once, would decide that, you know what, if Bakugo's such a jerk, then he just won't go to that school anymore. So she literally goes down to the principal's office, goes on a rant about how her son shouldn't be treated that way, and though she doesn't like to act like this all the time, she is Izuku's mother, and no one will protect him unless she does it. So she would pretty much resign Deku from the school and say that she needs all his paperwork so that she can sign him up for a different school. And so the dude pretty much just transfers to a different like academia or whatever, as you know, he goes through his life coursing day-to-day stuff, and in his new school, though he's not Mr. Popular exactly, he has a couple of friends and no one picks on him there, right? He has a new chance to make a new life for himself, and seeing as he's just, well, a nice kid who doesn't really get in anyone's way, most people actually like him, but he doesn't exactly say that he would have a lot of friends per se, just a lot of acquaintances. That said, as Izuku would be in class one day, he'd be pretty much tapping his pencil on the desk, overthinking about the fact that his quirk still hasn't activated. Izuku would be looking at his hand, trying to breathe fire in the back of the class or make his pencil float, but the more that he tries, he would just fail. This is when eventually one of Izuku's pals at school, noticing that Izuku looked down on this day, would pretty much go over towards Izuku and throw a ruler at his face. Izuku catching it would say, ow, what was that? Until his friend holds his own ruler out and goes, on guard, Izuku, I'm gonna take you out unless you fight back. And so Izuku's just like, hey, stop that, until, you know, the both of them start like sword fighting together, and Izuku just goes, I'm gonna cut your ruler, as you know, he swings at nothing but the air, and shling, the ruler gets cut in like 3 different places, except for like the part that his hand is holding. So the students seeing that would be like, whoa, you. Both of them realize at the same time, and they both scream, I got my quirk, as the other one goes, Izuku got his quirk. The entire class turns to look at him, and they're like, whoa, you finally did it. They're like, what is it? as Izuku would turn towards them explaining that his quirk has something to do with cutting things. At least that's what he thinks. He would go on to explain that he was playing like a sword fight with his buddy and he cut that thing in 3 different spots without even touching it. He thinks it has something to do with maybe telekinesis, maybe he telekinetically did that. And following this, Izuku would proceed to look at the class. They're like, can we see you do it again? So Izuku holds the ruler out and his buddy, he's like, all right, do it again, Izuku. He holds a ruler out in place and Izuku, he slashes at the air and boom, the other ruler gets completely cut. So Izuku seeing this would be like, all right, I got my quirk. And shortly after, Izuku would get a call in the classroom with it being like, principal's office, Izuku, send Izuku Midoriya down to the administrative office. He's going home early. So Izuku, grabbing his bags and telling everybody he'll see them tomorrow, would go and find out what his quirk name is and have it registered. And it'd be pretty sick because his quirk in this timeline is going to be called Slice. And now I know a lot of you guys might be disappointed by that because you're thinking, dude, this isn't Mihawk. This is just a guy who can cut things. But the more that I started thinking about making Izuku actually Mihawk in the sense of he trains to become this incredible quirkless swordsman, I don't know, man. Like, I just really like this approach that I went with more, and I hope you guys do too, because at the end of the day, the dude is still going to be pulling off some crazy feats just like Mihawk will, and who knows, maybe I'll still give him observation hockey sometimes down the line. So let's continue on the story. After this discovery of Izuku's quirk would go down, Izuku would discover how the quirk actually works, and the doctors would go on to inform Izuku that so long as Izuku is holding an object, literally an object, Izuku can slice at the air and like whatever he's picturing will be cut. They would run a multitude of tests starting from wood to stone to iron, and they'd be a little bit scared to test out diamonds because, nobody exactly wants to do that. But they would give Izuku a plethora of objects for him to try to use his quirk on, and Izuku would cut them all effortlessly. The dude didn't even need to make actual contact for the quirk to activate. He kind of just needed to swing his sword in the air, which was insanely busted. And with that being the case, just think about the applications that Izuku would pull off with this. I mean, we already know that Izuku's a smart kid, and he tends to make the best of his situations. Now think about what this dude's gonna start pulling off now that he knows he has a quirk. Immediately, Izuku would tell Inko to put him into a swordsmanship class, even though he doesn't technically need to learn how to use a blade or anything like that. He thinks it would be awesome. And in class, we would definitely see some moments where the teacher's all like, all right, guys, use your scissors to cut it like this, and Izuku will literally proceed to grab his pencil and just like swing at the air and make perfect cuts. Like the guy can cut out little origami figures perfectly, and all he has to do is swipe at the air with an object in his mind to cut it, and it just does it. Izuku doesn't necessarily have to cut everything in its path. So say Izuku wanted to cut somebody and there was someone else standing in front of him, Izuku would be capable of slicing at the air, and if he's concentrating, and I do really mean he has to concentrate hard on this is something that he's definitely going to be spending like every year until he makes it to UA working on not overdoing it and cutting way too much, because there would definitely be occasions where Izuku would take things too far when, say, he was cutting his steak at dinner and the dude accidentally would cut the plate and the table, which would be kind of bad for Inko, but it's just one of those things that comes with having a heroic quirk. So Izuku growing up would be very talented, and after he discovers his quirk, his life would change, like a lot, and I do mean a lot would change for Izuku. People would start telling him how great he is and how awesome he is, and he starts having more friends around him, and the dude even probably ends up having a couple of girls crushing on him, which is just hilarious to think about Izuku having that happen. So yeah. But anyways, with that being the case, what takes place after this is that we kind of just time skip to the 10-month period where Izuku normally would encounter the sludge monster as well as All Might, but since in this timeline he's going to a different school, there's really no possibility for Izuku to ever encounter himself in that situation. However, I would like to think that Izuku would still end up somehow finding himself face to face with the sludge villain, which is exactly what I'm gonna have happen. I'm gonna be saying that All Might, after capturing the sludge villain and saving some other random civilian or kid, he ends up bottling the sludge villain and accidentally dropping him just like he would in the original, which then leads to Bakugo picking it up, and as Izuku would be on his way home, since the dude still lives in the same area, he'd be walking by when suddenly, boom, he hears explosions in the distance. Izuku rushing over there to find out what's going on and catch a glimpse of the action, since he's still keeping up with studying heroes and stuff like that. He arrives to the scene to see a multitude of heroes standing by as a sludge-like monster would be attacking a student. The moment that Izuku would lock eyes with the person, Izuku would know instantly who it was, as underneath his breath Izuku would say, "Kachan." Then suddenly grabbing his keychain, Izuku would grab his All Might little toy as he slashes at the air 4 different times, causing the sludge villain to get ripped apart and cut right in the spots where it could release Bakugo, as Bakugo would be able to get free, flying up towards the air saying, "Damn you!" As in the air, now the heroes had more than enough space to run in and try to attack the sludge villain. And as the sludge villain was piecing itself back together, not really being affected by Izuku's slashing capabilities, the heroes would be able to successfully contain the sludge villain, as Izuku would walk away, kind of just blending in with the crowd, with Bakugo sure that he had seen that annoying green-haired broccoli kid. But as he tried to go out and search for him, he was gone. Izuku was already at home. It's at this point that Izuku would then receive a text later on in the day from Bakugo, which would essentially go on to say something along the lines of, "You were there at the incident, weren't you damn nerd?" As Izuku seeing that would kind of just mark it as read and delete the convo, and then kind of just go back to doing his own thing. Izuku's, just kind of at home watching his samurai movies, since Izuku in this timeline is super, and I do mean super, into like swordsmanship and all that stuff. When you walk into Izuku's room, you would see like a samurai armor stand, which has an entire samurai armor, which is like obviously a replica, so it's not that crazy expensive, but it's still expensive, meaning that the dude had to go into work with Inko a couple of times and, help out a little bit when it came to that. And when you look at his wall, Izuku has like 7 katanas all lined up with his favorite sword, Mihawks' legendary black blade. Obviously it's just a replica and the thing is made out of like cheap metal, but Izuku grabbing it in his hands and placing it in the hilt just like Mihawk does, the dude would start to change into his little Mihawk cosplay outfit and just kind of standing there and like just pretending that he's one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Izuku would start to, act out like Mihawk, because in this world of My Hero, they have the One Piece comics, and that is his favorite swordsman. Well, secondly to Zoro, obviously, because the dude still hasn't defeated Mihawk. But regardless, Izuku's just kind of standing there, and this is when Inko knocking at the door would say, "Izuku, dinner's ready." Izuku falls to the ground going, "Coming, mom." And Inko hearing that would be like, "Young boys," as she walks away being, "Make sure to wash your hands," with Izuku going, "What?" As the dude finally making his way towards the kitchen would say, "Why'd you need me to wash my hands?" As Inko just gives him a stare being like, "You know why." And Izuku just looks at her being like, "'Cause of dinner?" And she's like, "Sure, we'll go with that." This is when we would have Izuku just kind of like looking at Inko, with her like having like a chuckle on her face, like a fun, like a teasing expression on, as Izuku would kind of just look at her and be like, "Mom, what's going on?" And she would say, "Oh, it's nothing," as we would pretty much just time skip through the 10 months of training, where Izuku just focuses on cutting a bunch of different objects and focuses on improving his physical, abilities. He works out, he attends like his little martial arts class, and Izuku starts, pretty much designing his costume planner, which ironically is literally just Mihawk's outfit, because he is like a Mihawk cosplayer. He also ends up dyeing his hair over this course of this time, so now he ends up having like the black hair instead of his green hair, just to make the outfit pop a little bit more. And when he's wearing his hero costume, Izuku most definitely is going to be wearing eye contacts to give him the Dracula Mihawk eyes, which is going to be absolutely insane. But With that being the case, Izuku would find himself like right on the day right before the UA entrance exams, as Izuku would be completely unable to sleep. I mean, he's been waiting years and years for this moment to enter UA, the same place that All Might, his favorite hero of all time, went to. He just can't wait to go show everybody what he can do and to start saving people. That's all Izuku's ever wanted. So eventually the day would pass and Izuku would pull up to the testing area extremely exhausted because the dude couldn't get a flicker of sleep last night. So as he would be paying attention to President Mike going on about, how the test is going to function and 0 and 1, 2, 3 pointers, Izuku would kind of just be silent, kind of dozing off, as Ida would say, well, if this is a mistake from UA, like the annoying thing that he does in the original timeline, as he would then call Izuku out for snoring, and Izuku would then be laughed at. But Izuku seeing this would feel bad, realizing that, yeah, he's an idiot. He should have slept last night. Even if it meant taking melatonin or something like that. He should have gotten at least a couple of hours of sleep. But as Izuku would kind of just sit there looking extremely drowsy, Izuku would pass the test, getting a grand score of say 76, and then making his way out to the robot portion. Izuku would be standing there with a gigantic sword on his back that he had actually put in a request for at UA headquarters, asking if he could take a support item. They would ask what he wants to take, and after pretty much explaining to them that he's pretty much just taking a replica toy with him, the commission would be confused, but they honor his request. And so the moment that the gates would open and as everybody would flood inside, Izuku would stand up, as seeing that there's a multitude of people about to go attack at one of the robots, Izuku would slash at the air as the robot would be cut in half, exploding right before Ida could even throw his kick. Following that, Izuku would stand up from the big boulder he was sitting on, as walking towards the direction of the UA gates, he would grab the handle of his blade, as he would then go on to destroy 20 robots consecutively by sending out a sword slash that traveled so wide that it ended up cutting like a multitude of little robots, right? Following this, Izuku kind of just walked around in the areas, and noticing people about to destroy robots, just kind of swung his blade and the robots would be destroyed, instantly cut in half, or fourths or sixths or eighths. It really didn't matter, it just depended on how flashy Izuku wanted to get with it. And you would think this would drain his stamina or something, but no. The quirk literally has 0 drawbacks to Izuku, which means that unironically, this actually could be one of the strongest versions of Deku I've ever made. I mean, there is other ones that could easily one-shot this version because it's not like his durability is crazy, but when you think about the fact that all Izuku has to do is literally just like sling, and then you're pretty much dead if he wants you to be, or the cut isn't deep enough for you to die, like that's all it takes for Izuku, and he can take out a horde of villains instantly just by kind of doing the whole anime swordsman like unsheath and sheath. That's all it takes. Izuku's a freaking monster, let me just say that. But anyways, as time would pass by and Izuku would rack up more and more robot points, eventually the 0 pointer would be unveiled, and the moment that the thing would come out of its little like cocoon hiding place, Izuku would send an upward slash, cutting the robot in half as it falls 2 sides separately. This would show just the extent of how powerful Izuku is, because Izuku would complete the entirety of the thing without hardly breaking a sweat. And the only reason he was sweating was because it was actually kind of hot. So with that being the case, Izuku passes with a grand total score of like 146 robot points, as he would simply walk off the area with the 0 pointer continuously exploding in the background. Izuku would walk off so nonchalantly, but inwardly, the dude is just like, did I pull it off? Did I pull it off? People are looking, as he's kind of just like looking down, like looking at them with like the yellow eye contacts that he's always wearing. And they would just be like, who is that? Izuku making his way home and closing the door, he'd have a smirk on his face as he's just like, okay, I did it. I pulled it off. Hope people don't think I'm a jerk. Maybe I overdid it with the Mihawk act, as Izuku just kind of thinks to himself that hopefully he looked cool. That said, after this, we kind of just time skip to the day of Izuku's first day at UA, after of course receiving his acceptance letter, as Izuku would enter the classroom, and upon entering, Izuku would kind of walk in with this like quiet persona. But upon entering, as Izuku's trying to aura farm, Bakugo in the back of the classroom would yell, "Hey, you damn nerd!" As Izuku hearing that, turning to Deku, would feel shivers go down his spine. And seeing Bakugo, he would think, great, well, guess I can't exactly act that way anymore. Izuku would proceed to wave at Bakugo going, "Hey Bakugo, how's it been?" As Bakugo would look towards the direction of Izuku and be like, "How'd you get into this school, you quirkless wannabe?" As Izuku would look at Bakugo, telling him that, like he said, he awakened a quirk. Bakugo would say, "Huh? You're talking back now? Looks like you grew a pair in the last couple of years." As Izuku staring at Bakugo would tell him, "Yeah, and it looks like you've been staying the same. Still just the same old bully as always, eh, Kachan?" Bakugo hearing this would say, "What the hell you just say to me, Deku?" As Izuku looking at Bakugo would tell him it was nothing. After this, Izuku would just sit down a little bit distance from Bakugo, as one of the people who was actually at the same testing site as Izuku would walk over towards him. This would be Aoyama, who would say, My, you're the boy that was cutting robots left and right. You sparkled." Izuku hearing that would look at Aoyama as he's like, "Yeah." And suddenly, one of the girls looking at Izuku would be Araka. She would say, "Wait, you're the boy that was causing all those robots to magically blow up?" Izuku would, be holding the back of his hair going, "Yeah, that was me." As Araka would say, "Well, that's so cool. What's your quirk?" And once she would ask that, the entire class would kind of go silent, as Izuku would be about to explain what it is, until suddenly Aizawa would get up and say, "Alright, if you're here to make friends, then I suggest you leave. We have 3 years to turn you into model heroes, and that's barely enough time. So put these on and meet me outside." After hearing this, Araka would say, "But what about orientation?" As Aizawa looking at her would say, "We don't need orientation. At UA, I'm allowed to run my class however I want, so put those on and meet me outside, and don't make me repeat myself." Following this, everybody would follow Aizawa's orders, and Izuku in the changing room would be, getting dressed, as suddenly he would get shoulder bumped and look to see that it was Bakugo. Izuku noticing this would kind of just roll his eyes, as he would think to himself that he doesn't exactly feel like hospitalizing Bakugo over being, well, a bit of a insert bad word here. Anyways, that being said, Izuku would make his way towards the direction of the outside area, and once there, Izuku would be tossed a ball, with him catching it and asking Aizawa what exactly this is for. He would go on to explain to Deku that today, they're going to be showing the limits of their quirks, as he would go on to give a speech about how all their lives they've been taught that everybody's equal, but here at UA, they're going to be breaking that mold. Here, it makes no sense for them to treat everyone the same, and that today, they're going to be seeing who's the strongest and who needs the most work on their quirks. After hearing this, the class would think, "Whoa, that sounds like fun," as Aizawa would give them the ultimatum of the final person coming in last place being expelled. After hearing that, Izuku would lock in and throw the ball as hard as he can, getting an impressive score for a normal human being who doesn't have an amp strength quirk, as Aizawa noting this would think to himself that that's, above average. As in the back of the class, we would kind of just see Bakugo there going, "Worthless Izuku, can't even throw a ball far enough." He'd go up next saying, "This is how it's done. Watch and learn, loser." He would kind of grab the ball as hard as he possibly can before throwing it with an explosion and getting 800 meters. Editing Xehther here. Before I get back into the video, I just quickly want to say I forgot to mention it since obviously I didn't do an intro today, but if this video somehow manages to break 1500 likes, then I'll be dropping another One Piece related video soon. So depending on who you guys want me to make a video on, then drop their name down below in the comments, and the person who gets the most likes, I'm going to be making a video about their power or their thing very, very soon. So good luck with that, guys, and let's get back into the video. Izuku at this point, noticing that Bakugo was clearly showing off, would kind of just scoff and roll his eyes, as Bakugo looking at him would notice this and say, "What? You wanna die, Deku? You got something to say?" But Deku would simply just ignore him, as he would then go on to continue on with the rest of the tests. And because he doesn't exactly have a quirk that benefits him physically too much, and the only strength that he does possess is because of his own physical training, Izuku would get scores a little higher than the ones that he gets in the original, but it's still not enough to get him out of last place, because the dude misses the mark by like 1%. So with that being the case, Aizawa would stare at Izuku as he would tell him to come with him. And this is when we would essentially watch Aizawa and Izuku leave the classroom. As Izuku does that, he would pretty much stare at Aizawa as he would tell him that that test back there wasn't exactly a fair measurement of how his quirk can perform. He would tell him that his quirk is a very combat-based thing, and it doesn't exactly enhance his strength or make him faster or anything like that. Aizawa would look at him telling him that he understands, but that he's not really getting expelled. He's only doing this to bait the children, telling him that he's actually just getting the chance to go home early and that there's no way he's going to expel somebody with his potential. He'd go on to explain to them that he's going to be shocking everybody tomorrow. And as Izuku would hear that, he would look up at Aizawa questioning what exactly he's on about. But this is when Aizawa would have a smile appear on his face because he's about to teach the students a very valuable lesson. And so, the very next day would roll around with All Might bursting in the classroom going, "I am here," and the usual shtick, as then the students all pretty much get dressed up and all of them are told to pick pairs that they're all going to be facing off against each other in 2v2 pro combat simulations. And so, as everybody would begin doing this is when suddenly Uraraka speaking up would say, excuse me, I don't have a partner." All Might would smile before saying that he sure does, as out of nowhere, Aizawa and Deku would arrive. It's at this point that Izuku, staring at the rest of the class in his full Mihawk outfit, would then be called out by Bakugo as he goes, "Huh, I didn't know Mr. Last Placer, cosplayer over here, was gonna be allowed to come back to UA. What happened to him being expelled?" Aizawa would go on to tell him that he made an agreement that if he won this, he could return to school. And Bakugo, hearing this, would smile, saying, "You mean I get to crush Deku and make sure he never comes back? This is gonna be great." He would stare at Izuku as he would tell him that he better get ready to change schools, as it's at this point that Izuku would smirk, knowing that Bakugo had no idea what he was in store for. And at this point, he and Ida would be in the bomb room wondering what exactly their strategy is going to be, or at least Ida would be, as Bakugo would say that there is no need for a strategy. He's going to go out there and kill the guy, as Ida would tell him that he doesn't think that that's the smartest, but at this point, Bakugo would already be gone and running towards the direction of where he believes Izuku to be. And Izuku would simply tell Uraraka to just stand behind him, that this fight should be over in about, 2 seconds? It's at this point that Izuku would grab a small little dagger knife, the same one that Mihawk would have used against Zoro, as he would go on to essentially tell him that for this fight, this is all he needs. She'd be stunned, Bakugo turning the corner and throwing an explosion. Izuku slicing at the air would cut the explosion in half as it would dissipate, and Bakugo would be stunned, going, "What the?" He would then stare at Izuku, as suddenly, looking at his arms, he would notice that his gauntlets were gone. With Bakugo saying, "You damn bastard!" he would rush towards the direction of Izuku in an attempt to blow him up at close combat. However, this is when suddenly his pants would fall down to his knee level, and his underwear would be cut off, as Bakugo would be like, "What?" This is when, seeing this, he would cover himself up before then Izuku would proceed to essentially nick him all over his body with tiny little cuts that were just enough to do enough damage to cause Bakugo to start feeling like a burning sensation everywhere. Then suddenly, from his back pocket, Izuku would grab, I think it's hyaluronic acid, or you know that acid stuff that our parents would put on us when we were younger, whenever we scraped our knee or something, they swore it would help. Yeah, Izuku would put pretty much disinfectant on Bakugo's wounds, which caused the guy to just practically start writhing in pain. Then he wraps him up with his capture tape and simply just says while he's walking away, "So much for last place, huh?" As Bakugo would be gritting his teeth in rage, pissed off at the fact that he had no idea his quirk was that strong. And as Izuku would make his way into the bomb room with Uraraka, he would tell her to go take care of the bomb. As Ida would rush towards him, but Izuku, not caring about Ida, would simply cut his engines off. This would cause so much pain for Ida, but it wouldn't kill him considering they will regrow. and even stronger, mind you. So, as Ida would be on the ground practically quirkless, Izuku would tell him to just stand down, with Ida accepting this and knowing that there's no real reason for him to injure himself further. And so, with that happening, the 2v2 battles would end, with Izuku coming out on top and Aizawa explaining to them all that though his quirk doesn't necessarily help him when it comes to practical application, when it comes to combat, a quirk like Izuku's can practically be unbeatable. And as everybody would be staring at Aizawa, they would question why he lied to them, with Aizawa telling them that he wanted to teach them a lesson, and that is to never underestimate someone's quirk. As we would then see Izuku walking out victorious, with everybody just starting to glaze him and saying that they can't believe how strong he is. They would go on to ask him if this is really the kind of potential he has, and he would tell them that of course it is, he just wasn't able to show it with those weird little tests. As Momo would then speak up, going on to explain that that actually makes a ton of sense, saying that not everybody has quirks suited for more amplified type tasks. Not everyone can run fast or jump high or even have super strength, but there's quirks out there that are truly deadly. As Izuku would go on to explain that his is one of those, and that if he really wanted to, he could actually kill all of them by simply unsheathing this little blade. All of them would stare at Izuku terrified, with Izuku saying, whoa, 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 that's just an example, it's not like I'm actually plotting to kill anybody here, and they would all realize the magnitude of his quirk. He essentially has an insta-kill ability by his side at all times, and that, well, you know, it's just terrifying. That said, the school day would end, and after this would take place, Izuku would pretty much be waiting for Bakugo to get out of the nurse's office, because truth be told, he did feel kind of bad. I mean, after all, Bakugo did only just trash talk him. It's not like he actually caused him any injuries, right? But that would only last a little bit, because the moment that Bakugo would come out, he would start screaming at him, telling him that the next time they fight, he'll kill him. And then Izuku would realize why he took things a bit too far, going on to think to himself that maybe he actually didn't take things far enough. As he would then, start chuckling to himself before then thinking that he's an idiot and he needs to stop that. After this would take place, this is when we would kind of just jump cut to the very next school event that actually matters, which is pretty much just the USJ, and with that taking place, this is when we would pretty much just jump cut to everybody hearing Hero 13 go on and on about how dangerous quirks can be. Izuku hearing this speech would just kind of think, you think I haven't figured that out? I nearly killed my mother once trying to test out my quirk. And this is when we would kind of just flash backwards to Inko holding like cutting boards that they would go to Home Depot to get just so Izuku could practice. And the dude nearly actually ended up cutting her, which was actually insane because she never ended up helping him with that ever again. In fact, she ended up just buying Izuku this little stand that could hold these wooden boards. He kind of just has to clamp them. And then after that, Izuku's free to practice in the house as much as he wants. That said, on this particular school day, Izuku actually would be rocking a kimono. And some of you guys might be questioning why Izuku in the world would be wearing something like that. Well, let me explain. As Izuku would actually enter the classroom, last night he just finished binging a new anime called Demon Slayer, and now Izuku was barging in there with the Tanjiro Hashira robe. Like, the dude doesn't even take things seriously. Obviously his hero costume and favorite swordsman is Mihawk, but he just finished getting a gift from his mother, which was essentially just the Tanjiro sword, and he was not about to let this perfect opportunity pass up. So as Izuku would be sitting there with this like big box behind him, this is when suddenly one of the girls would tap him and go, "Hey Izuku, you think you can put me in the box? I don't want to listen to her yap anymore." Izuku hearing this would start chuckling as he would say, "Yeah, go for it." And so we would see Invisible Girl literally get into Izuku's box before suddenly the both of them would be teleported right to the center of the lake simulator. And once there, Izuku would realize that this was not good. As a multitude of villains would start to get closer and closer, Izuku holding his blade underneath the water would literally in his mind think, I forgot what form it was called, but the one that if he's in water it works a lot better, like something tide, as he would spin in the water and then a bunch of villains would have gashes on their chests. Izuku would then swim out with Invisible Girl like jumping out of the box, as he would then suddenly be saved by Suyu, who using her tongue would wrap around himself and Invisible Girl, putting the both of them on top of the boat, with Izuku, catching his breath and going, okay, what the heck just happened? With her pretty much going on to explain that villains attacked and they teleported them there. Izuku realized that he didn't pay attention because he was too busy talking to Invisible Girl. And so feeling bad about this, Izuku seeing that there was a multitude of villains and Aizawa was currently fighting like 30 plus villains, would pretty much rush over there, telling Tsuyu to throw him with her tongue, and she would do exactly that, as Izuku would land, and the second that Izuku would touch down and begin to just absolutely destroy these villains with his katana blade, he would just start annihilating them, as Shigaraki would start scratching at his neck going, "It's not fair. How is a student taking on so many villains? Nomu, kill him." And suddenly, we would see the Nomu appear right in front of Izuku, with him thinking to himself that this is his chance to show off how much he can really do. He would slash at the Nomu, but the cut itself would heal instantly, as Izuku would then proceed to be punched so far away, shattering his right arm. Izuku landing on the ground, coughing out blood, would look up as the Nomu would be about to punch him once more, but Izuku, grabbing a small little piece of rubble that was like on the ground, would then swipe it at the air, cutting the Nomu in half from its torso, with the Nomu falling onto the ground and starting to regenerate. It's at this moment that Shigaraki would start laughing, going, "The Nomu has instant regeneration, you damn brat, so good luck cutting that thing. It's no longer just a human, it's the perfect combination of quirks to kill All Might himself." And Izuku, hearing that, would look up at the Nomu, seeing the brain going that it can't heal infinitely, as he would then grab his object and slash at the air literally over 100 times, with Shigaraki going, "That won't do it." But the Nomu would fall into little cubes, like the dude was slicing up an onion or something. The Nomu's dead, bro. And as Shigaraki would stare at the direction of Izuku, Izuku would look at him with these eyes of like, "Move a single muscle and I will kill you, bro." And so Shigaraki would just be standing still going, "Ow, how did you?" As suddenly Kurogiri's warp gate would teleport Kurogiri and Shigaraki out of there, as Izuku, standing there writhing in pain because he had just underestimated the Nomu, would be completely in shock, thinking to himself that that never had to take place. As we would then see Aizawa rushing to Izuku and asking if he's okay, telling him that this is why students don't need to get involved. But Izuku looks up at Aizawa, telling him what? He was supposed to just let his teacher die? With Aizawa looking down at him and saying, "No, thank you for helping." This is when we would see Izuku getting treated with a little cast on his arm, and Recovery Girl would help speed up the Recovery Girl. And he would heal in about, say 3 days? Which would be pretty good considering that he would pretty much just be healing during the off time that the school would have. And speaking of this little event, it's kind of hilarious how I gave him that Demon Slayer durability of just straight up getting like thrown around and having like a bone break. It's hilarious. I mean, considering the fact that I gave him the Tanjiro outfit just for like poops and giggles, I don't know, man. I just had to do it. But anyways, for the remainder of the story, Izuku is going to be having the whole Mihawk drip and just looking absolutely badass. So with that said, after this would take place, the students would all be informed of the UA Sports Festival, and with that event coming closer and closer, Izuku in this timeline would actually completely reject the notion of giving a speech, saying that, well, it's not really his thing. And so, instead, the second place runner-up would be the one to give it, which would be none other than Katsuki Bakugo, who would simply say, "I'm gonna win everything." As we would then have the events begin with the race, with Izuku doing pretty well. I mean, considering the fact that in the original, Izuku was able to snatch first place, I see no reason why Izuku with his new abilities would not be able to just cut through the obstacles in front of him, slicing through the landmines, slicing through the robots, and, well, for that one little area where he has to like tightrope and kind of just like crawl on that part, he's still gonna just do that, I think. Which means that Izuku either ends up placing somewhere from 20th place to 6th place. So really, it doesn't really matter. But the point is that once Izuku passes that event, Izuku would then go on to pick his partners. And considering the fact that he didn't get first place, Mei doesn't exactly offer to help him. So instead, Izuku's going to be getting paired up with Uraraka, Momo, and Tokiyami. I think that's a pretty good pairing. One that I'm not going to cover because I could not care less for the cavalry battles, so we're going to be skipping straight to the 1v1 battles. And because your boy is kind of exhausted of doing the same Deku versus Shinso followed by Deku versus Todoroki, I'm going to be switching things up and using a random generator to decide who he's going to go up against. And for Izuku's first match, Izuku is going to be going up against Divine Girl. That's interesting. So yeah, let's make him go against her. So with that being said, the match would begin and instantly Izuku would look towards her with this gigantic blade on his back and tell her sorry for this. As Divine Girl would simply start like praying or something like that, and she starts pretty much saying, oh please, like shine light on me or something like that. I don't know what she'd be going on about, but she'd be doing something like that, as suddenly a bunch of vines would go flying at Izuku, which Izuku would cut down instantly, which would shock the Vine Girl, who thinks that all she has to do is overwhelm him. So she would shoot her full outputtage of vines at Izuku. However, it's in this moment that Izuku would shoot a devastating sword slash at her, which would cut not only through the vines, but would actually get to her. This would be a devastating slash that would actually leave a scar like right towards her abdomen area, which would cause her to fall down onto the ground and start bleeding a little bit, with Izuku looking towards her and telling her to give up. This is when all the vines would be cleared via Izuku just slicing them all, and then looking towards her, he would go on to explain that this is a match that she just couldn't win. So she would withdraw from the battle, and Izuku's next opponent would be Tetsu, with Tetsu stepping up into the ring and looking towards Izuku, telling him, end of the line, kid, I got a quirk that can perfectly counter yours, cause there's no way you're gonna be able to cut through my steel. And Izuku, hearing this, would kind of just like internally laugh, with the match starting and just shling! Tetsu would fall down to the ground unconscious, with his armor being completely shredded through by Izuku, leaving him to move on and now facing Momo Yaoyorozu. Or actually no, I don't think he would face off against Momo. Wait, would he? Actually, yes, because in this timeline, I could see the possibility or a world in which Denki was facing off against Tokiyami, and because he has his lightning, he ends up beating Tokiyami, but because Momo can create that little like lightning cloak thing that like pretty much like insulates it, she could potentially actually beat Kaminari. That's really interesting. Yeah, no, it's going to be Momo Yaoyorozu. So with that being said, the other semifinals match would obviously consist of Todoroki and Bakugo, meaning that that'd be a pretty interesting fight to watch, but since we've already seen it in the original, no real need to cover it. That said, the second that the match would start between himself and Momo, he would go on to tell her if she can create a sword, that maybe they can go at it swords to sword, as Momo would smile, going on to tell Izuku that while she isn't exactly wanting to take on his domain, she'll accept so long as he uses actual swordsmanship, thinking to herself that maybe Izuku without his quirk will be completely defeated, and Izuku would accept, holding the gigantic blade, with Izuku thinking in his head that she just made a horrible mistake. That yeah, his quirk definitely makes him a formidable opponent, but if she thinks Izuku has zero swordsman ability, then she is dead wrong. Izuku would proceed to use this literal replica sword, which is not even like sharp, it's dull, as he would proceed to mollywop Momo, destroying her completely, disarming her, before then kicking her off of the arena and winning entirely. Then, Izuku would find himself with his final opponent, which would consist of either Todoroki or Bakugo, but no matter how you slice it, they're both gonna get sliced, which is just hilarious. Because if Todoroki tries to start the battle off by shooting an ice geyser at Izuku, slice. Ice geyser cut in half, Todoroki is getting a massive gash on his chest and is not gonna be fighting anymore. Bakugo, say he tries to fly into the air and use AP shots or something. Same thing's gonna happen. Deku's just gonna cut him down, which means that no matter how you really want to think about this, Izuku ends up being the winner of the sports festival, meaning that now we kind of just move on to the students picking their hero names, with Izuku choosing the pro hero name, the pirate hunter, Mihawk, with people around the class saying that that's actually a perfect name for him, going on to explain that the dude does have a quirk that practically allows him to be the real life Mihawk. So they would like congratulate him on that, before then asking Izuku where exactly he thinks about interning, because they're all curious considering that the kid who won probably has the most offers, right? However, they'd be wrong because the one with the most would actually be Todoroki, seeing as he is the son of a pro hero. However, when it comes to who Izuku was going to be interning with, I'd like to think that it would possibly be that one old samurai hero who's like in the top 10. Not a lot of you will probably recognize him, but that's the person who I feel most comfortable with sending him to. So with that said, as Izuku would be taking his internship, we would still have poor little Ida possibly getting killed. Actually, no, entirely getting killed. Stain would 1,000,000% kill Ida in this timeline, because without Izuku's protection, that was going to be Ida's fate all along. So yeah, Ida's kind of dead. Alright, so continuing the story, Ida's death definitely does end up affecting the school, because once everybody would return and they're all like entering the classroom, they're setting their backpacks down and they're all literally just starting to talk about how excited they are for, continuing what's going on. This is when suddenly somebody would note that something feels off. And suddenly Mineta would go up being on like, yeah, where's Ida? The annoying little class rep. Normally he'd be telling us to shut up by now. And it's at this point that they're like, yeah, Ida's running late, Uraraka would say, as Aizawa, finally making his way inside the classroom, would look to all of them before giving them the somber news. Your classmate Tensei Ida is dead. He died trying to go after the hero killer Stain. And as I know many of you guys will probably take this, it won't be doing us too well. So for today, we're going to be skipping your hero course training and you will all be allowed to go back home. As for the details of this incident, UA has been told to keep things on the low, so as for what we can tell you, there's not really too much information. Izuku, hearing the fact that his classmate is literally dead to an actual villain, would be stunned. Like, yes, he knew that people died when you become a hero, but he was only a student. He wasn't supposed to even come close to that fate quite yet. And the class would go somber. Aizawa, picking up on this, would tell them all that while he is aware that they didn't exactly spend too much time with Ida, he knows that the class rep meant something to them. As he would go on to tell them that the Tenya family has actually invited them to his funeral in about 1 week. So the classroom would go take care of that, and there everybody would say a few words for Ida, with even Bakugo saying something kind of nice. He would go on to say that he'll avenge him and make sure to, leave little pieces of the hero killer here and there. Something a bit aggressive, but regardless. After this would all take place and about a month would pass by, the students would have went through the final exam section with them passing and stuff like that, and Izuku would have definitely went up against one of the teachers. As to who exactly is the one that he would have went up against, like, I don't want to be that guy, but like, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't think you guys understand how overpowered this version of Deku is. Like, all this dude has to do is swipe at the air and he could kill you, like genuinely just kill you. But the character that I think would probably do Deku the best for this specific event would probably be Plasma, considering the fact that Deku would practically feel free to just cut them all down, with the real Plasma making it very clear that his true body is all the way by the gate, where they have to escape. So Izuku would most likely go through this event simply cutting down each and every single one of the plasma clones, with Froppy using her camouflage ability to, kind of stay hidden and take out a couple of plasma clones along the way. And once Izuku would make his way to the real Plasma Man, he would pretty much just task him if he's the real deal, to which his teacher would nod and Izuku would tell him to step out of the way or he could get cut in half and find out how his clones fell. And Plasma did not exactly feel like dealing with that, so stepping to the side, he would allow Izuku and Froppy to cross the finish line. And so, after this would happen, we get the mall incident without the Shigaraki intervention. Because keep in mind, in this timeline, Stain doesn't exactly go viral because he never has that moment with the heroes where he has to impose his will on them and pretty much just show the world how truly terrifying the hero killer is. Instead, the League of Villains is actually now short a few members, with some ranging from, probably Toga, as well as Spinner, and I want to say Magna. I believe they would still have Twice and Dabi just because of their connections to the league prior, but yeah, they're definitely going to be losing like 3 members, which isn't too big of a deal, but hey, I figured I'd mention it. So with that being the case, there's no real reason for Shigaraki to go out in search of Izuku to have the conversation about staying. So they kind of just have a nice day at the mall with Izuku and everybody in the classroom kind of just walking by, when suddenly, as the group would all be like, whoa, like let's go to the movies, Izuku would be walking by with everybody, and this is when suddenly he and a certain someone would cross paths. As Izuku stares at her, she would look back at him, and the two of them would almost be starstruck by each other. As Izuku would look back at her, like continuing to try to get glimpses of what she looks like, Izuku would find that she was actually staring back at him. And in a moment of what like should I do in his head, he would think, like screw it, like I'm not gonna find a girl that pretty again. So Izuku would pretty much end up leaving his friend group, saying that he'll be back, as he would go over towards her, and she would be around this gigantic brood of a man named Inasa, as well as this purple-haired boy who has a strange quirk. I'm pretty sure you guys already understand who this is. Izuku would walk up and he would say, hey, what's your name? As, this person would end up replying, oh, my name's Kami. Izuku, hearing that, would go on to talk to her for a bit, as he would realize one thing very rapidly. Though she is very good looking, her personality is that of a potato. So after getting her number, Izuku would kind of think to himself that he doesn't exactly feel like pursuing this option. And so thinking to himself that he doesn't exactly feel like, dating a crayon, he just kind of never messaged her. He would get a message or two from her, but that was all there was to it. And he's probably going to have to deal with the repercussions of that later, but hey, that's for a later date. Anyways, continuing the story, Izuku would finish up his day at the mall, and once that would be done with, we would find them all at the forest training camp, where everything would go by extremely smoothly. That is, until the League of Villains Vanguard squad would attack at night. And as Izuku, just like in the original timeline, would be trying to talk to Koda, suddenly Izuku could see the silhouette of a large man getting closer and closer. And once he would get up close to them, he would throw a massive punch, trying to crush Koda, killing him instantly. Izuku, noting this, would roll Koda and himself out of the way, going on to ask the man what exactly he thinks he's doing here, with Muscular unveiling his identity and Koda freaking out, going, You're him. Izuku, realizing that not only was this man attempting to kill Koda and him, but he was also the one responsible for the death of the water hose heroes, Izuku would have this strange look on his face, as grabbing the small little All Might toy that Izuku seems to have on his keychain, Izuku would hold it out in front of him, telling him that he has 2 seconds to turn around with his tail between his legs, or he's gonna be walking out of here in a body bag. And Muscular would say, huh? You think I'm scared of you, kid? Quit dreaming! Reeling his arm back, he would go in to punch Izuku. However, the blow would never land, because the man would tumble down and fall down the mountain, as he would fall with a loud thud. He would have gave him a Zoro-like injury, with Muscular being completely out of commission, and Izuku pretty much putting his toy back on his keychain, thinking to himself that that guy was a freaking idiot. Afterwards, he would tell Koda that he'll never have to worry about that villain again, with Koda smiling and like crying into Izuku's arms, getting like a little bit of snot and tears on him. Izuku would be like, as this is when he would pretty much take him towards Aizawa, where Izuku would rush into the forest, knowing that if there's villains here, then his classmates might not be so well equipped to take them on. And so, rushing inwards as fast as he can, Izuku would run into Tokiyami, who at the current moment was freaking out, and Shoji was trying to keep him calm. So, Izuku, noting that he needed to calm his classmate down, would do the one thing that he knew he could do for him: cut him down. With an injury that wasn't going to be hospitalizing him too bad, Izuku would take Tokiyami down unconscious, leading to Dark Shadow going back into his hiding place, as they would all, while carrying Tokiyami of course, find Todoroki and Bakugo, who would be struggling against the villain Moonfish, since neither of them could really use their quirk, with the fear of the fact that they could technically engulf the forest on flames. So, once Izuku would arrive, grabbing a small little All Might toy and waving it in the air, as Moonfish would be sent flying, finding multiple gashes on his skin and finding himself completely unconscious. Bakugo, noting that Izuku was doing that with the literal All Might keychain, would look at him and go, "Frickin' show off." As all the group would simultaneously run through the forest, this is when they would encounter Uraraka and Sue, who were both currently just traveling through the forest trying to see if there was anybody else they could help, seeing as in this timeline there was no Toga for them to be distracted by. And so, as the group would go through the forest trying to make their way back to the rest of the class, this is when suddenly Bakugo would disappear, with Izuku noting that his buddy is gone. So, Izuku turning to the direction of I was gonna say Moonfish, but no. What is this guy's name? Mr. Compress. Yeah, Mr. Compress. Turning towards the direction of Mr. Compress and seeing him jump from tree to tree, Izuku would simply think to himself, again with this, as he takes his All Might plushie off his keychain and swiping at the air would cut his back like 8 times, forming like the little tic-tac-toe thing. No, 4 times actually. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, the tic-tac-toe thing. As Mr. Compress would fall to the ground in agony, with his back having like the literal tic-tac-toe thing carved into it, and Izuku would make his way there, where he would see Kurigiri's portal and Dabi's flames being shot toward him. Izuku in this moment would cut the flames before they could even get to him, as he would go on to tell them that those villains were not going to be getting away with any of this. And so, Izuku holding his little plush toy in front of him would go on to slash at all the villains to take them out. However, it's here that a barrier quirk would activate, and suddenly all of the members would be within it, as All For One, making his arrival, would go on to tell Izuku that his quirk is impressive, but he's afraid they're gonna have to save their little encounter for someday in the future. Izuku, sensing this presence, would just have like a feeling inside of him screaming, you need to kill this guy. Like, this guy is dangerous. So Izuku, knowing that he probably shouldn't do this, but he feels like he has no choice, he would like look down at the ground looking somber and downcast as he would swipe his hand in the air, and All For One's head would detach from his body, with the villains having been teleported away with a black sludge substance, and All For One in like pretty much just falling to the ground dead. Izuku would be the only one standing there, as eventually the rest of the classmates would arrive, and Izuku would kind of just be standing still, Bakugo going, Deku, you did it. This is when Izuku would look at Bakugo and nod that, yeah, he killed the villain. Bakugo, staring at Izuku, would just say, whatever, we'll tell Aizawa about this and this will all be cleared up. You'll be fine, Deku, don't worry. This is when Bakugo would start to get a little bit worried, thinking that, damn, like, as much as he hates Izuku, he never thought he'd have to find something like this. Like, yeah, he knew Izuku's quirk was dangerous, but he never thought Izuku would resort to killing someone. After some time would pass, it would be discovered that the villain Izuku had offed was named All For One. And so, after a brief little situation and rundown with All Might, everybody would go on to find out that Izuku actually made the right choice. As not All For One, but All Might would sit Izuku down, go on to tell him the backstory of All For One, as well as his legendary battle against the evil villain, explaining to Izuku that a long time ago, he had actually thought that he committed the same mistake. However, it was clear that he didn't finish the job, and now that burden rested on Izuku's shoulders. He would tell him that this is not going to get out in the media, and that All For One's existence needs to stay a secret. So as for his hero license or him being in the school, everything's going to be remaining the same, and he's not even going to get in trouble. And as Izuku would hear that, he would think, but I killed a man. As All Might would explain to him that sometimes there's some villains that are just not worth throwing in prison. Some need to simply be killed. And as Izuku would hear that, he would just look at All Might, as All Might would slap him on the back, telling him he's Mihawk after all, right? The pirate hunter. Just think of him as a pirate and just call it a day. Izuku would smile at All Might, telling him that he's right, as he would spend the next couple of weeks like kind of getting over it, until eventually he would find himself in the Provisional Hero licensing exam, and getting off the bus, he would see Inasa, who would say, hello Izuku, it's you once again, slamming his head on the ground, saying that he can't wait to, face him as a rival. And suddenly, Cammy would appear from behind, going on to explain to Izuku that she's surprised he hasn't called yet, with Izuku rubbing the back of his head and saying that he actually thinks that he wrote the number down wrong, as Cammy would say, but the texts have been going through. As Izuku would take a deep breath and say, alright, there's no real reason in lying to you. I won't lie, you're gorgeous. Too gorgeous in fact, but if I'm being real, I don't think our personalities mix. And Cammy hearing that would look at him and go, I am so over this. Like, you guys remember how like annoying she was in the anime? As Izuku would kind of just be like, well, I guess it was for the best. And then afterwards, Mineta would come from behind and be like, dude, you completely fumbled the bag. I can't believe you let that walk away. As Izuku would kind of just look at him and say, shut up. This is when they would take the test, and the second that the other schools would try to do the UA crush, by attacking UA off the bat, Izuku simply grabbing his small little dagger blade, unsheathing it from its small little holder, would cut every single red ball that would be thrown at their direction in fourths. All of them just exploding, with everybody watching on and Izuku smirking. Everybody would say, retreat, we've gotta go, he's too strong. When suddenly, like 50 of them would fall to the ground, slashes on their backs, as Izuku would go on to tell the class that they might as well just capture them, that it's a free buffet. Everybody would do exactly that, moving on to the next section, with Aizawa facepalming going, you weren't supposed to make it that easy. And the entirety of Class 1A would pretty much get their provisional hero licenses, with the exception of Bakugo and Todoroki still, just because Bakugo was a horrible personality, and Todoroki, well, he was clashing with Inasa a bit, so he should have seen that coming. Anyways though, with that being said, we will now jump into the final arc of the story, which is essentially just the Overhaul arc. And I wish I could make this into like a grandiose thing, but funny enough, Izuku's like strongest opponent to face is actually going to be Mirio, considering the fact that the dude in this timeline is going to be the sole inheritor of One for All, meaning that he's going to have speed that's probably going to be able to catch Izuku off guard, and he has the one ability that's going to be giving him access to not being sliced and diced by Izuku, so he's kind of a bad matchup for him. Oh, another bad matchup for him would definitely be that one girl from Class 1B who has the quirk similar to Buggy's. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Oh, and speaking of Buggy, if you guys have ever wanted to listen to like a what if Deku was Buggy's reincarnation or had his powers, look up Billy Puffin on YouTube. He just dropped like his own what if Deku had his powers, and I'm telling you guys, that series is goated. I was listening to it while I was making breakfast today, and I gotta say, it was great work. I'm gonna be dropping a collab video with him very soon, a second one, so you guys be on the lookout for that. But anyways, back to the story. Izuku would definitely have a brief skirmish with Mirio where he would lose for the first time, and afterwards that would happen, Mirio would probably invite him to his agency, saying that he has a lot of potential. As from here, we would probably end up seeing Izuku joining the Tsunade agency with a lot more ease than he would in the original, just due to the fact that in this timeline, Izuku's not the inheritor of One for All. So even though Tsunade does kind of have a stick up his butt, he's not going to be too rude to Izuku. And by the time that they go on the hero patrol and Izuku would run into Eri, a little girl who literally clasps onto his leg, not wanting to let go, there's just no way that Izuku's gonna be able to stand idly by and let the little girl go off with them. So as Mirio would tell Izuku to do that, and he would let Eri go back into his arms, suddenly he would go in and say, oh wait, I actually have a gift for you, grabbing his keychain and holding a little All Might Tor, swiping it in the air, as Overhaul would have gashes and cuts all over his body. Blood would begin pouring out as Eri would be grabbed by Mirio, and Overhaul would pass out unconscious on the ground, with Izuku saying that there's no way he was gonna let that girl go, and he doesn't care if he loses his hero license. That girl is not gonna spend one more night feeling that much fear again. And Mirio, noticing this, would pretty much tell Izuku that he did the right thing, that honestly, he regretted telling him to let her go and he was gonna act. And Izuku would say, what, really? As Mirio would go on to say, yeah, and honestly I would have taken the fall for this, but since you already went up and gashed the guy up, I guess I can't exactly do that. Izuku at this point would then look at Mirio and laugh as he would go on to tell him that it's probably for the best. And so with Overhaul being handled, All for One being handled, and the rest of the villains practically being fodder. Like, Izuku is literally the stereotypical anime swordsman at this point, because if you ever try fighting him, say you shoot like a lightning quirk, slash, he cut your attack in half and then proceeded to cut you and just like destroyed you. Say there's like a group of 100 villains surrounding Izuku that are all like trying to like take him down or something. They're like, he can't beat all of us. Shling! Like all of them just fall to the ground and Izuku's just standing there untouched, like completely unfazed. That's the type of hero that Izuku is in this timeline. So with some time passing, Izuku would probably end up getting together with one of the random girls from UA, whichever one you really want to pick, doesn't matter to me, and eventually go on to become one of the top 5 pro heroes in Japan. He makes his goal and everything kind of goes dandy for him, with crime rates eventually dropping so low that Izuku literally has to retire and proceeds to pursue a full-time UA teaching career, seeing as, you know, there was still people trying to become heroes. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that has been it for me today. I hope you guys appreciated today's story, and it was a lot of fun for you guys to listen to and stuff. But without any further ado, Azuma, bro, I hope you liked it. I hope you guys liked it too. It has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.